Okay, Recovery First podcast. Man, we're going to keep beating this drum. I'm your host, Mike Todd. I want to address something that has like come up from time to time, and it really makes me think. These statements that are made, these things that are said to me and others who get out here, who are a voice, who maybe even be a face for people in long-term recovery and or mental illness. The folks that get out here and beat this drum, I want to address that. And the first thing I want to say is, if you are doing that, if you're a person in long-term recovery, if you're a person that's overcome mental illness, and you come forward with a bullhorn, with a podcast, with a whatever it may be, I don't care, a TV commercial, you advocate for legislation, I want to say something and I want to stand very firm on it. You have a right to do it, and I want to encourage you to do it, and others want to encourage you to do this. I find it very interesting. that if you're a person in long-term recovery and you do this, that you're pegged as being egotistical, outshining, whatever it may be, okay? I find it very interesting that we have to face that kind of criticism, which is fine. But I'm going to say something here. We have to face these kind of accusations and criticisms. But isn't it interesting that it's okay for any other organization, churches, the American Heart Foundation, American Cancer Foundation, whoever it may be that puts personalities out there that promotes their cause, that's okay. But when it comes to recovery, when it comes to mental illness, and we have people who do that, it's pegged as being egotistical. And I'm going to tell you something. Don't fall for it. Don't even listen to it. Okay? Period. Because what it is, I'm going to tell you what it is. Point blank. It's called stigma. It's called discrimination. Everybody else has a right to promote. Everybody else has a right to have faces. Everybody else has a right to be a face for what they believe in. For whatever it is, whether it's a AIDS movement, or whatever it may be. Could you imagine going up to someone who is, advocating for minorities and going up to them and telling them that they're egotistical? Could you imagine doing that? Could you imagine telling them, hey, you're wrong for doing this. You should stay anonymous. You should just get over in a corner and you don't have a right to do this. Could you imagine how absurd it would be to tell other groups of people that they don't have a right to do this, or to shun them, or to shame them because they do this? So I've got something to say. And it's, if you want to do this, do it. Do it. And I'm going to say this. Listen, this podcast, I want to thank, Todd, who is the producer of this podcast. He doesn't mind saying this, is a person in recovery, and this is how he loves to give back. This is how he loves to give back. This is what he does. His wife likes to see him do this. His kids like to see him do this. This is what he does. This is a talent that he has, that he wants to put out here. Okay? And I get it. Right now I'm the face. Right now I'm the host, whatever that looks like. But I'm going to tell you this. If someone wants to come forward and says, hey, I want to learn how to do a podcast, or I want to learn how to host a podcast, or even if you want to sit in and host the podcast, you are certainly welcome to do it. Because we keep what we have by giving it away. We keep what we have by giving it away. There's nothing that would make me happier than have some young dude come forward and say, hey, I'm interested in that podcast that you do. And I get it. We don't have this big audience and everything else because this is something that has been pushed to the side, and you don't hear about it on the nightly news. It's not a conversation in households, but it should be. Rome wasn't built in a day. We'll continue to try to build this. We'll continue to try to beat the drum. We'll continue to try to get it out here. Why is it so important? Really? We've lost 500,000 people to overdose. We lost 100,000 people last year to overdose. We have kids walking around the street, people that belong to other people who are fathers and mothers and sisters and children that are walking the streets in mental illness with nowhere to go but to walk around. It's the equivalent of watching somebody bleed out, and yet we don't do anything about it and we don't speak up about it because we're actually shamed and criticized when we do. Well, I've got news for you. We're going to continue to encourage people to speak out. I want to thank people like Ryan Hampton and Garrett Hayde for bringing the recovery advocacy movement to the United States of America. All the personalities that are out here, that are beating the drum, that are doing Facebook Lives, that are giving out naloxone, that are talking about this publicly. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I'll put the batteries in your bullhorn. Listen, nothing's going to stop us. We're going to do this. And I think every community had to go through this. I think the HIV/AIDS community had to go through this. The minority communities had to go through this because you know what? It's suppression. And I'm going to say something else too. Been around the block. I'm 56 years old. Been around the recovery for a few 24 hours. If you got somebody running around worried about somebody else's ego, then their ego's probably the problem. Just a little tidbit of information. The person that's worried most about everybody's ego is the person that has the ego problem. Believe you me, been there myself. Talking about somebody else's ego and talking about somebody because they're out here doing things. I had to take a look at myself. And what I found was that it was my ego. It was my stuff. So Recovery First Podcast, keep tuning in. We're going to keep supporting the people out here that are doing the work on the ground, that are doing things to try to help with the opioid crisis, harm reduction folks, people in housing, recovery community organization, peer support specialists, all of the county agencies. We're going to bring all this to light. Period. And we're going to continue to build on this. So keep listening. Keep tuning in. Recovery First Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Todd. This is Mike Todd with the South Carolina Recovery Housing Association. I would like to thank Challenges, Inc., the Recovery Advocacy Project, and the Clinton Foundation for helping us get naloxone to all recovery houses in South Carolina.